Punawala, thank you so much for joining us. I know that we've been in touch over email, so I'm so happy to see some of you face to face. I'm the executive director of Higher Hopkins. We are a design thinking innovation office out of Johns Hopkins, and our focus is helping companies get access to the best talent possible and also improving diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace for our hiring partners. So first of all, I really want to congratulate you in being a part of our very first launch of the DEI Collective. We are so thrilled you're here. We're so thrilled to be partnering with you. You know, just to give you some data, we had 250 applications this year, which really blew us out of the water. That my goal was 30. So we're really, really grateful. You are one of 50 companies who we selected to test out this initiative with and see what kinds of outcomes we can build together. Our goal is that by the end of this long program, all the way until February and March, that you will have your goal number of interns from underrepresented communities at Hopkins. That's what we really aim for. So next slide, Elena. Today, we're going to spend the next 90 minutes on the following topics. So I'm just going to spend you know, a little bit of time going over the program and membership expectations. And then I'm going to pass it off to the SOAR team, who I'm so excited for you all to meet. They've been my partner. They've been doing a lot of behind the scenes work on making sure this initiative was successful and planned in the right way. So I'll pass it off to them and Elena, who leads them, and she'll go over kind of the diversity and the group interview format and kind of what we expect and some best practices and what we've seen work. And then we'll wrap this all up with a Q&A session to just make sure that if you have any questions, they're answered. Again, we're recording this, so you can refer to this later or send this to colleagues if they're going to be helping you with interviews. And just as an addendum, through our time together today, we've actually recorded a conversation with Christine Cruz, and she's the VP of Higher Ed at Handshake. And she has a lot of insights to share about kind of the topics that we're talking about today. And we're really glad to be sharing some of those snippets with you. And we'll send you the full recording of our conversation afterwards as well. So I'm going to start with the boring stuff. And I ask that you please bear with me because my slides are pretty ugly and I didn't know how to make them pretty because it's just a lot of boring ops information. But I know you've been getting a lot of emails from me. And my goal is that for all of these things will be second nature. And I know that once you're sick of hearing it, that's when you're going to know for sure what the ops look like. So just an overall of how it works. So what we're doing right now currently, because you're a member, we have already started marketing your roles to our students. And we've done our best to kind of identify like your requirements. You know, whether you are only taking US citizens, whether you're open to sponsoring, OPT, CPT, all of these things we've put in the postings and we're doing our best to make sure that you get that volume that you want. You will receive resume books automatically from our system on December 30th. I know a lot of you will probably be out of the office then. So on January 4th, which is kind of the first Monday after the new year, your account manager will be following up with you to make sure that you got your resume books. And then from that moment, you'll have a week to pick the candidates you want for your group interviews. We'll make you a schedule. That's also something that's very cumbersome because we want to make sure that no student is double booked, but that everyone gets to talk to who they want to talk to. So we're going to make group interview schedules, which is why we ask for your open availability and your interviewer's open availability those 2 days. You likely won't be busy the whole day. So you can kind of think of it as like a deep work day for you that you're setting out in addition to the interviews. We'll send you schedules, and then after your group interviews, you can choose your top candidates and continue the process with them. I've gotten this question a lot, like, can I give them a case study? Can I do additional things with them? Absolutely. The group interview is just the first screening, and then you'll make offers and report to us on outcomes. Next slide, Elena. So here are some housekeeping items that I just want you to be aware of. Ops emails are in your inbox. I tried to put every little thing that you need to be worrying about right now in that email. It's quite long and it's not fun to read, but please go through it so you're aware. One thing I want to be super clear on is that we cannot be flexible on deadlines. I'm getting a lot of our team members are working during the holidays to make this happen in everyone's internship like deadline. So we cannot be flexible on deadlines. So if you miss a deadline, I'm so sorry, it's not personal, but we just can't include you in the schedule. So we sent a spreadsheet over. Please get acquainted with it. Because you'll have to send that without any errors on January 11th by 5 p.m. And if you at the company don't really want to be the right point of contact, I know we have some alum who are really enthusiastic, but they're not in HR, or they want to kind of pass this on to someone, please let us know so we can interact with them sooner rather than later, and they can be the point of contact, because we'll be going back and forth with them a lot. You should have an email with your account manager on it. If you haven't received your communication from your account manager, please let me know. They should be reaching out either this week or early next week. And then the last part that I really, really want to kind of hone in on is we can't legally exclude students from applying. I'm sure you are all aware of diversity and equal employment laws. So we aren't allowed to exclude students from applying who don't fall into the URM categories that we explained. So as a kind of prerequisite, we've required all students applying to your roles to write a personal statement for the position with a specific prompt. And the prompt is, please submit a brief personal statement that explains your interest in the DEI Collective and/or how your experiences reflect your commitment to diversity through one of the following attributes: first generation, limited income, racial minority, LGBTQ+, international origin, or disability. And we're really hopeful that this statement encourages students in these populations to apply and reminds those who don't fall into one of these categories to be mindful of what these opportunities represent for us. So I'm telling you all of this because you'll be receiving, in addition to as part of the resume books, you're going to be receiving a personal statement kind of linked to that resume. And it's really important that you all do not use these personal statements as a qualifier in your applications, because some students may disclose information about them, some may not. But the purpose of the personal statement is not really to force anyone to disclose their personal identifiers. It's really just as a kind of reminder to our Hopkins community what the DEI Collective positions are for. And that's our way to kind of hone in on that population. So I just wanted to be clear. And if you have any questions about that at the end, I'm happy to go over it. Next slide. Okay, here's a list of all the deadlines. I will not read them to you and go over one by one, but just these are all the things that you should be aware of. I think the most pressing one and the most challenging one will be the January 4th, January 11th, which is the resume book turnaround time. It's tight. In the past, I've been told by companies that 1 week is a very short time, but we also wanted to be mindful of your internship hiring deadline. So that's the compressed timeline. So you have exactly 1 week to review all the resume books, or a couple more days if you look at the automatic resume book on December 30th. That's the most important one that you need to be aware of. Next slide, Elena. And then just one last kind of opt thing, membership requirements if you're part of the DEI Collective. So you're making a good faith effort to hire the number of interns you listed in your application. We understand if we don't send you enough candidates. We understand if they don't fall into the citizenship category that your company hires for. And we understand if they just don't pass your interviews. We just ask for a good faith effort. The internship must be paid in a minimum of 5 weeks. If you're here, that you already know that because all of your internships are paid and at least that long. We ask that you follow best practices and guidelines. That's on our website as well. It's just some very short, basic guidelines we ask for. We'll go over that in March, so don't need to worry about that right now. And then that you're available for this call, which you're here, so well done. First one's checked off. Both full days of the hiring event, and then another group call in March, which will go, this is after you've made the offer and just kind of prepping you for how to have a good experience with your intern. And lastly, you agree to report hiring outcomes to us. We're all about metrics. We love data, and it's really important to us to show our leadership the results of our efforts here. So that's I think the last point. Next slide, Elena. Okay. So I'm so excited to be able to introduce Dr. Elena Hayes to you. She's the Senior Director of Life Design, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Johns Hopkins. She currently leads the SOAR team, and SOAR stands for Seizing Opportunities, Access, and Relationships. And she leads a team who's also on our call today who work in co-curricular spaces on campus. And they have a special focus on connecting with our FLY, which means first generation and limited income students, and our URM students, underrepresented minority students. Elena is such a powerhouse. I'm so happy to be working with her. She received her doctorate of education from Hopkins School of Education, and her research interests were focused on first-generation college students and their access to social capital that connects them with internships and employment opportunities. So she's literally the perfect person to be working with us on this. I'm going to pass the baton off to her so she can continue this morning.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Thrilled to be with you today. I'm going to jump right in. We're going to do an activity. I think that we can listen for a long time, but certainly doing something is helpful in this work. And so I'm going to lead you through a bit of an activity that we've actually done with our students, our first year students, in an identity and inclusion workshop as well. So first, I want to just go over the identity exercise instructions. So on the following slide, I'm going to, you're going to see 9 different identities that are placed in text boxes around the slide. And I'm going to go over the definitions of each of those identities first before we start. I'm sure they'll be familiar to you, but just so that we're all using common language and are in the same kind of headspace, I'm going to share those. And then after that, I review the definitions, I'm going to read 12 different statements. They are I statements. And with each statement, I'm going to ask that you, using your annotate function, will stamp by the identity that aligns with your thinking or your belief of that particular statement. And just to familiarize yourself, if you're not, haven't used the annotate function here on Zoom before, the way that you access it is to, it looks like this bar at the bottom, but basically you roll over the top and you should see annotate. And it's like a little pin symbol. And you can click that. And then once you click that, you'll see the bar that I have screenshotted there at the bottom. And you'll click stamp. And we're going to use the heart stamp for this. So click the heart stamp. Thumbs up if we are there, if people have it. Good. Yes, excellent. Just to test, go ahead and stamp this slide if you've got it. Fantastic. I'm seeing lots of that. Wonderful. Okay, good. So we're all great here. I'm going to go ahead and clear the drawings from this one, and we're going to go on to the next slide. I'm going to read the statements. I'm going to clear these. Okay, so the definitions I'm going to go over. You see them around the screen there. So in no particular order, I'll start with age. Age is how old one is, feels, or is perceived. Gender is one's sense of self. I'm going to clear you all for your drawings. Gender is one's sense of oneself as a woman, man, non-binary, agender, or other identity. Disability status is collection of capabilities and limitations that can affect a person's access to resources and activities. Health status, physical and mental health conditions that shape the way people experience the world. National origin, one's country of origin or where one's family or lineage comes from. Physical appearance, the way one looks, may include characteristics such as height, weight, skin color, body size, etc. Race, ethnicity, socially constructed grouping of people based on physical characteristics, family culture, and or nationality. Always like to point out socially constructed. I think that's important. Religion and spirituality. Religion is grounded in a belief system. Spirituality is generally grounded in an individual's sense of connection to something bigger than themselves. Sexual orientation, emotional, romantic, sexual, affectional, and or relational attraction. Terms may include gay, lesbian, heterosexual, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, etc. And then lastly, socioeconomic status, or SES, which is social position based on income, education, and occupation. So just again, keep in mind that as I read these statements, sometimes you're going to have to choose between two different identities or several different identities. I know that these identities often intersect, but for this activity, just choose the one that fits best for you. And it's possible that you may have done this activity in the past. That's totally okay. Maybe these statements will be familiar to you, but our identities are always changing and shifting. So what affects you in one identity now may be different than it was when you previously did the exercise. And then lastly, just make sure not to make assumptions of others as you see their stamps or symbols on those particular identities. This can sometimes be a vulnerable exercise, so I appreciate your vulnerability here. All right, and make sure that we're on silent. Everyone already is, so we're good. I'm going to clear this again, and I'm going to start reading the statements. Okay, first statement. This is the aspect of my identity I am most comfortable discussing. Go ahead and place your stamp by this aspect of my identity I am most comfortable discussing. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to clear all the drawings. The next statement. This aspect of my identity I am least comfortable discussing. This aspect of my identity I am least comfortable discussing. Okay. I'm going to clear. Before I entered the workforce, this was the aspect of my identity that I thought about the most. Before entering the workforce, this is the aspect of my identity I thought about the most. Okay. Since entering the workforce, this is the aspect of my identity I have thought about the most. So since entering the workforce, this is the aspect of my identity I have thought about the most. Since entering the workforce, let me clear this. Since entering the workforce, this is the aspect of my identity I have thought about the least. Since entering the workforce, this is the aspect of my identity I have thought about the least. Okay. Just a few more statements. I have experienced the most joy around this aspect of my identity. I have experienced the most joy around this aspect of my identity. Okay. I have experienced the most pain around this aspect of my identity. I have experienced the most pain around this aspect of my identity. Okay. This is the aspect of my identity that is most invisible. This is the aspect of my identity that is most invisible. Thank you. I feel most judged by this aspect of my identity. I feel most judged by this aspect of my identity. Just two more statements. In everyday life, this is the aspect of my identity that I have to defend the most. In everyday life, this is the aspect of my identity that I have to defend the most. And last statement, this is the aspect of my identity that I am proudest of. This is the aspect of my identity that I am proudest of. Great. I'm going to clear all drawings. You can close out your annotate function with an X. Thank you so much. And I want to just have a little chat about that for a moment. So, and feel free to unmute yourselves or drop it in the chat. But first question, what was your decision-making process as you went through the exercise? Anyone care to share? Especially when there were maybe multiple identity categories that you feel that you had to pick one. First thing that came to mind. Thank you, Dana. Anyone else? Same. Okay, went with my gut reaction. Thank you. Was anyone, did you, when you clicked your identity on some of those, what I spend the most time thinking about versus what I think others most think about me, very true. Sometimes hard to choose between what's most current or what's been most prevalent throughout my career, where there was most a challenge. Absolutely. I'm curious, at any point when you made your stamp, I saw this, I don't know if others did you notice that you were alone on any of those statements in terms of that particular identity? Did you realize that you were the only one that chose that? And you don't have to disclose what that might have been, but just curious if anyone had that, and if so, what was that feeling? Oh, I chose multiple stamps. Okay, well, we're gonna just choose one, but that's okay, Valerie. Valerie said, I will not choose today on this Friday. I'm gonna be all of my identities on this day. All of me is showing up. I appreciate that. But for those who did just choose one stamp, at any point, did you find that you were by yourself on the particular identity? Yes. Then maybe I hadn't listened well enough to your definitions. I doubt it. For a second, I felt self-conscious. Yes. No problem. I wondered if there was no one else with the same challenges. Absolutely. And that can be, I'm sure, not a great feeling. I mean, obviously this is an exercise, but the thought that of all these people, I might be the only one, you know, with this particular thought or identity can sometimes feel isolating. Don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you feel that there are no one else with the challenges, that it may just be you. And then what about in contrast, there were many times where most of these stamps were accumulated in the same place. For those cases, how did it feel to be part of an identity category where there were many people? Comforting, validating, absolutely. Letting you know you're not the only person to have that thought. I wondered whether people were thinking about it in the same way I was, but also validating. Yeah, people get it. People get it. A little sad to see so many had very similar challenges. That's also true, because you know, maybe in the ones where you talk about the pain and the challenges, to know that you felt that, you certainly hate to hear that others feel that as well. Well, I want to felt included, absolutely. The reason we bring these up, well, first, thank you for your vulnerability in participating. Certainly you have to, you know, expose yourself just a little bit in that exercise. But the reason we bring this up is because we definitely want you to encourage all aspects of diverse identities and find ways to bring all of these diverse identities into your workplace and then support those students in those different ways. And the reason for that is because for those who were the one where you were just by yourself sometimes on that particular thing, imagine being that in your workplace and you can't have anyone else to maybe talk about those things, or at least have community around that. And that's why we want diverse workforces in the first place, to build community and to offer diverse perspectives. It also helps us to make better decisions because we know all of the pieces of different people that are affecting our workplace, our customers, all of those types of things. And so creating environments where you create more inclusion and recognize that it's not just one aspect of identity, but there are so many intersections between identity that we should be thinking about. When you can bring in more diverse individuals from all of these aspects of identity, you're really going to have a more vibrant picture of your workforce. And our students find identity, as you do, in so many different ways. Unfortunately, I think, we are in this place where we maybe think very visible identities, but some of these are very invisible. There were some things with health status or disability status that maybe someone would not see, but being able to incorporate those individuals into your workforce is going to really create a more vibrant picture of everyone that is there. It's going to be much more inclusive. So that's why we're doing this collective in the first place, is really an opportunity to share and to engage a variety and a diverse group of students. So before I turn it over to my colleagues, I'm going to play a brief little snippet of a conversation that I had with Christine Cruz. Great conversation. Because it was so long, I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I'm just going to play a couple snippets throughout. And then later, after our event today, I will be sharing the link for the entire conversation because there's some really good information there. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and I'm going to share the recording. Just bear with me for 1 minute. And okay, can everyone see it says accept on the screen? Okay, great. I'm going to press play. Well, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to talk with you today, Christine, and happy to hear your insights. Can we maybe get started with a brief introduction? You tell us who you are.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me with you today. My name is Christine Cruz. I'm currently the Vice President for Higher Education and Student Success at Handshake. We're the #1 place for college students to find jobs and internships, and I've been here for about 2 years. Prior to my time at Handshake, I actually spent the past decade of my career working in higher education, and I'm actually originally from the DC metro area. So the easiest way to remember my resume is I've worked at all the Georges, GW, Georgetown, and GW. And after that, I was the associate provost at Wellesley College outside of Boston before coming out west to San Francisco. So excited to be here with you today.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, let's dig right into the questions. More and more employers are giving increased energy to diversity recruitment, and we're so happy to see that, actually, that energy. I know that diversity can mean many different things to different people. What does diversity mean to students? Also to employers, and I know you all do many surveys through Handshake and have an opportunity to capture a lot of data around that. And how do those definitions or what it means to each other differ between those two groups?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways that you can kind of look at this. So I think on one level, you can look at it from a language perspective. I think a lot of times people use diversity and inclusion interchangeably. They are not interchangeable. However, I think people sort of say DEI, D&I, diversity and inclusion, or they say one word hoping that it means the other. And I think it's important to actually kind of parse that out. So I think sometimes when people say diversity, literally what they mean is just representation of different individuals with different backgrounds, whether that's race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, academic background. There's a number of different ways that a population can be diverse. However, when you're thinking about inclusion, and I actually think more students, when they are looking for a workplace, they actually mean inclusion, not just diversity. They don't want to just see representation. They actually want to know that the environment that they're going into is composed of behaviors and social norms that actually ensure people feel welcome, right? That's actually what inclusion means. And I think a lot of times when students think diversity, or they think employers that are committed to diversity, that's actually what they're referring to. They're referring to inclusion. So how are you retaining your talent? How are you ensuring that they have a voice at the table? Things like that. I also would be remiss if I didn't share, when you talk about diversity, I think right now the biggest conversation sort of starter for most people is we want to have more Black representation. We want to have more Latinx representation. And that is fantastic. That's obviously a wonderful goal for all of us to have. However, diversity does include women in male-dominated fields. It might include men in female-dominated fields. It might include people from different parts of the country. It might include hiring students or recent graduates from schools that you don't typically recruit at, right? It could mean different academic backgrounds, so you have a different way of thinking about problems or approaching an issue. So you can actually think about diversity in a very broad sort of spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece. That inclusion piece is definitely what I hear from students too. I'm wondering, do you feel that this has been kind of a shift? Okay, thank you for that. We'll play another segment later, but I'm gonna go back to our PowerPoint here. And if you can still see the slides, hopefully. Yes, no, what are you seeing? Yes, excellent. All right, I'm going to turn it over then to my colleague, Andrea. And Andrea Wiseman is our Assistant Director of Life Design. She leads and works with she's on my team. She's fantastic. She's been at Hopkins for a long time, I think 10 years now. And she works specifically with our engineering students, and particularly those who are first-year students. But she's had a lot of work because of her experience and work in Res Life before, and some other areas of Hopkins that very much use group interviews. She's going to share some aspects of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea.
Great. Hi, everyone. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to go over a couple of ideas for effective group interviews. Some of you may have used group interviews in the past, Some of you may not have, but probably most of you have not done virtual group interviews. So some of these would pertain to some in person, but we tried to make them as applicable to a virtual environment because that is definitely different. But why would you do a group interview? What is the purpose? What are the goals and what are the benefits? One of the great benefits of this is to reduce the bias and inaccuracies because everyone's kind of in the same place. They're the same conditions. There's a consistent structure. It's unlike when you're interviewing someone on a Monday and then a Wednesday and then a Friday, you get people confused. This way, everyone is all in the same place. So that is definitely a great benefit. You can show which candidates work well together if you're doing some type of an activity, who's listening, who's leading, who's jumping in, who's offering some type of validation to somebody else. That is a great thing that you're able to see as they're working and talking together. Also, in terms of fitting well with the company culture, you might be able to see which ones kind of stand out that you could actually see yourself working with them within your company. You're going to be able to see better communication skills, teamwork skills, as well as some stress management skills within as they go through the interview, because it is a stressful environment. An interview is stressful regardless of whether it's in person, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's panel. But this way, they're all, again, in the same conditions, and that could be stressful for them. And you're going to see how they react to a new question or how they react to a case, if you're doing case type interview. That's a great way to see how each individual reacts in the same situation. You're able to potentially find potential leaders, and that's not to say all of the extroverts or all of the people who jump right out, but you can also still see leaders break out, even if they're more of the quieter leaders. You're able to see who might stand out, again, who might validate somebody else. And you're able to see their skills in action. If you are doing some type of an activity, you're seeing how they think, how they process, and how they then go about sharing that information to you and to others in the group. And these are just some other kind of tips and tricks. You certainly want to do your best to determine the structure. The more prepared you are, the better they'll be for you and for the students as well. What does that structure look like? These structures are up to you. Whatever works for you, for your industry, for the role that you're applying to. And figuring out interviewer roles. Is that going to be just one person? Is it going to be kind of a panel? Who's asking the questions? Who's doing the evaluating? Figuring that out ahead of time. How are you observing? Who's observing what? Are you all observing everybody? How does that work? So figuring that out beforehand is certainly going to be effective. Here are a couple of parts of the structure that you could include, just ideas. If you already have an idea of how you're going to structure your group interview, we're not telling you how to structure your group interview, but here's some things that you could potentially do. So icebreakers, some of those kind of just personality questions, right? Would you rather be super strong or super fast? You're going to get a bunch of different answers. You might get a sense of their personality, their thought process, their reasoning, possibly values, depending on the type of a question. That could be a great way to break the ice. Group questions, so asking each one kind of individual questions, but their answers are going to be very different. How did you contribute to your latest team or group project? And group discussion, so is there something that a topic that you could give them where they might go a little bit more back and forth, a little bit less individual. So what are your thoughts on such topic or such research project that we're currently working on within this industry? Or some type of a group activity or work simulation exercise, providing some type of a case scenario could also be something that could potentially work for you as well. Then you can observe them, watch them come up with a solution. That's another thing that you could potentially do. And these things that you probably know a little bit about. Interviews are meant to be conversational, not confrontational. So you're not trying to trick them or stump them. You certainly want to see them, how they manage stress and how they problem solve. But we want to make sure that we're actually trying to find the best candidates. They're already nervous as it is. So making sure it's a little bit more of a back and forth conversation, because they also want to find the best fit. As you've probably heard, an interview is kind of a two-way street. And then there might be those candidates, especially virtually, who might not be talking as much, might be nervous about whatever might be behind them, depending on their home situation, depending on their internet connection. So realizing that extroverts and introverts do have different strengths. Is there a way to pull out those introverts to try to be a little bit more descriptive? Watch who seems to be a little bit actively listening, which virtually is a little bit more difficult, but you certainly can tell if someone is nodding their head or really looking right at the camera, and encouraging them, calling them out, not in a rude or a confrontational way, but asking, you know, if they have a thought on whatever you might be talking about. And then here are possible types of questions. Again, you don't have to hit all of these. Some of these might not fit the role that you might be trying to fill, but these are, and we have, I believe we're sharing links to some ideas of questions that fit all of these different categories. So they're most of these are kind of self-explanatory. Are you looking for analytical skills? What's a question about cultural fit? So for emotional intelligence, for example, the goal of emotional intelligence is seeing and testing how they manage their emotions as well as the emotions of others. So a question like, how did you manage a customer who was angry? What was your reaction to that customer, and how did you handle that situation? So they would talk through a situation in which they had to manage probably their stress and their anxiety, as well as how did they manage the anger of someone else, and that would show their emotional intelligence. So I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but we do have kind of information at the end about what each one of these particular question categories tries to get to, and also some examples of questions that might fit. So those are also idea questions that you could do.
Great, thank you, Andrea. And as she mentioned, we will be sharing a PDF of all of these documents, and we have some additional resources that we'll share at the end as well as a follow-up email. I'm going to turn it over to Hope in a moment. First, I'm going to share another segment of our specially recorded conversation with Christine for you all. So I'm going to cue that up in just a moment.
So some recruiting practices and criteria can unknowingly discourage or exclude underrepresented minority students from applying, and meaning underrepresented minority from any perspective. What are some of the practices or criteria that you have seen that do this?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few, and actually at Handshake, we've done a little bit of research on this in the past year with some of our data to sort of see how this plays out. So one is having an arbitrary GPA cutoff of 3.5. That's one of the most common recruiting practices that we see across many different industries, some of the most lucrative and difficult to get into. And we've actually known for a really long time, even outside of the DEI conversation, that GPA is actually not a good indicator of whether someone's going to be good at their performance in their job, right? But it is a number that makes it easy for you to be able to cut off applications, right? And when you are sifting through hundreds or thousands of applications, you might feel like you need something. Unfortunately, when you have this arbitrary cutoff, let's say of 3.5, you actually unintentionally leave out sometimes 1.5 times Black students, for example, or Latinx students, right? And so you actually want to open up your GPA window. If you're going to have a GPA cutoff, you should open it up to like a 2.8 or 2.7, 3.0. You're actually going to be able to allow for more students to be in that pool. Now, part of the reasoning behind this, for those that might be wondering, well, why is this? It is because if you think about the history of sort of what our Black and Brown communities have had to face, there's social inequity, which leads to educational inequity, which leads to housing inequity, right? All of that compounds year over year over year as students go through their educational systems, and they have very differing levels of essentially both educational attainment to resources, to teachers, right, to the types of courses that other students that might have been in more affluent areas would have been able to attain, which then contributes to GPA, right? And so GPA is not always a good reflection of talent, it's a good reflection of money. And so GPA is one really big one. The second is having a short recruitment window. So again, there are certain industries that do more of this, where they recruit, fall recruitment season is like beginning of September to middle of October, and it's essentially like a 6-week window. Well, when you do that, you actually leave out, again, a bunch of candidates from underrepresented groups. And again, the reason why is because many of these students have other obligations. Potentially they have to work themselves to be able to support them going to school. They might have to watch their family or take care of family, which is other pressing needs on their time. So they can't just go to school, participate in extracurriculars, and work on their applications, right? So when you have a really short window of time, someone might be juggling a 20-hour-a-week job, 20 hours a week of school, trying to do their homework. And when they have to put their application together, they might not have all the time that they need to not only put together a really great package, but get it reviewed by career services, get it reviewed by a mentor, and then actually fix all of those things. And if they don't feel really good about what they're putting forward, they might not. And so then you're not going to see as many. So opening up your recruiting window to have kind of just-in-time hiring, or at least rolling hiring, could be helpful to you. The third is not disclosing compensation. So again, students from underrepresented groups, think about our first-gen students, for example. If this is the first time going to school, this might also be the first time that they're going through a recruitment process to try and get their first job. And the type of job that they might be going after may be drastically different than what their family or their parents had, right? And the experience that they would have had. And so right now they have no guidance from their family per se to look at what type of compensation is good enough. Is that going to help me pay off my bills? Am I going to be able to support myself? Will I be able to support my family? For some students that have to do that, right? And so being upfront about your compensation can actually increase your candidates by 13%, your underrepresented candidates by 13%. And when you can actually share relocation costs, you can increase that. I want to say, if I remember our report correctly, I think it's like up to 30% or so. So relocation is also a really big one to be able to share. And then the fourth one that I'll leave you with is having really lengthy job descriptions and non-inclusive language can actually keep women from applying for jobs, in particular STEM positions. And so that's something to think about. Now, again, you might be wondering why. The inclusive language probably makes a lot of sense, but it's literally verbs like demanding, intense, relentless, competitive, right? Those are the types of terms that tend to actually steer some of your female candidates away, whereas using more inclusive terms like collaborate, partner, develop, you'll actually see an increase. And you literally could be talking about the same thing, but your choice in verb makes a difference in the kind of sort of culture and environment that you're creating. Now, with the lengthy job description, you might be wondering why, again, that is. Most of us have actually heard the study that's been done before, where when a female looks at a job description, they typically want to be able to do like 95 to 99% of the job before they feel comfortable applying. Whereas a lot of your male candidates might look at it and go, I think I can do about 60% of this, maybe go for it, right? And so the longer the job description, the more it sometimes can actually discourage some of your female candidates from applying because they might feel like they don't meet all of the qualifications. So it's as easy as actually even adding a statement in your job description that says, we want you to apply, even if you can't do all these things, right? So just make it explicit that you would still like those candidates to apply.
I like that idea, including that statement. I'm also, I mean, obviously I haven't done the research here the way that you all have, but I'm also just thinking too, as you think about aspects of like imposter syndrome that, you know, many students may face, I would imagine some of those same aspects in play when they, you know, read a job description and again, feel like, oh, I can't do every single thing here, or I may not be able to do it well. Or if, you know, I know sometimes in trying to describe the organization, it may sound like, you know, the organization is just this very pinnacle of success. We are the premier global, you know, whatever, which is wonderful and may be accurate, but it may be like, okay, then I'm probably not supposed to be there, you know, so. That's a good point.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really reasonable hypothesis, honestly. I think we hear that in our work with students all the time. I mean, over the years, I've probably advised thousands of students, and I think that imposter syndrome and that doubt is very real. The lack of confidence. I mean, they haven't done this before, right? And it's understandable that it's a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna turn back. I just love Christine. She's so she's so wise. But I'm going to turn it back over to Hope to finish us up with talking about evaluating candidates through group interviews. And I'm sorry, let me do a proper introduction. Hope Burke is also on my team. She's fantastic. She is the Assistant Director of Life Design, and she works specifically with our student leadership and involvement groups. So all the student groups who are on campus, we have over 400, and many are focused on various diverse identities. She works very closely with them in supporting them, and particularly with our first-gen limited income students. So I'm going to turn it over to Hope.
Thanks, Elena. And thank you all for being here again. We're so excited that you're a part of this inaugural initiative, and we're eager to walk alongside of you as we support access for our students. I get the privilege of talking a little bit about evaluation during this process. And I think, this next section really dovetails nicely with what Andrea was saying, in that, in this group interview space, preparation really is the name of the game. And so I think the more you can spend time to really sit down with your hiring team or with the people who will be managing your interns during this internship, and you can really think about what qualities are we actually looking for? What are the must-haves that this person needs to demonstrate in order to be successful in the role? Working back from those, descriptions and creating a rubric can really help you then come up with the best group interview question. So we hope that, the tidbits that you're taking from us today, you'll be able to sit down and really think about what do we really need and how do we craft a group interview that's going to actually test for that. And so, we know, and studies show, and if you're familiar with the Management Center, they're an incredible resource around mitigating bias using rubrics. And so we know, especially from our own participation in the identity activity early on, that, some of our identities we feel so saliently, and, other pieces of this are just unconscious, and we're not always aware of how our biases are creeping up in how we interact with others, especially during the hiring process. And so, like Andrea said, having a clearly defined set of standards, having a clear picture of what it is that the student needs to have to be successful in the role is going to be critical. It's going to help you rely on facts and observations rather than feelings. We know that some, typical unconscious biases that creep up could be around a person's name. It could be around their physical appearance. It could be around nonverbal behaviors. In this virtual world, it could be, based on their background and what's behind them when you're connecting with them. And so as much as possible, if you can keep the rubric and the questions centered around actual, observable traits and what will directly translate to their performance in the role, that is much preferred. And then the last piece is to really keep the scale of your rubric small. So I've seen a lot, and we'll include in the appendix that we share with you some examples of some rubrics, but using just a small scale of 1 to 4 is really helpful, and spending time, really thinking about what does a 1 look like? What does a 2 look like? What does a 3 and a 4 look like? Will help you then in the space where students are interviewing to just be honest and objective rather than going based on some of your gut feelings or kind of falling victim to the like me effect, where somebody who's extroverted and really easy to connect with, just kind of assuming that they are a 3 or a 4 when actually you're testing for something that isn't really about likability. Go ahead and switch to the next piece, Elena. So like I said, the Management Center is a great tool for this, and the appendix will include this great worksheet they have around thinking about your must-haves. What are your must-haves, your nice-to-haves, and being honest about what this person doesn't need to have, as you start to evaluate your candidates in the process. So, the first step would be to really think about what are those must-have qualities, use your job description to help you, and really be as clear as possible in the description. So as you're evaluating, you can refer back to that. The second piece would be to share that rubric with your hiring team, make sure there's uniformity and that there's clarity around what each of the pieces mean and that what you'll be looking for. And then steps 3 and 4, make sure during the group interview process, you let each interviewer actually complete the rubric independently. So don't, don't spend time kind of talking through like, oh, what should we give this person? Let everyone form their own opinion based on the rubric, and then spend time afterwards having the discussion to come to a final decision to decide who to move forward. So we actually don't have time to do this because I want to make sure we respect the 30-minute, position where we're going to answer your questions. But I think you've gotten a ton of great information today. So, I'd love for you all as you leave to really think about what are those must-haves that you really need for this specific internship you're hiring for? What would it look like? How can you test that in your group interviews? And then really to sit down and think about your numbers for your rubric. And then Valerie, I see your question. Yes, we do have a couple samples that we'll share with you in the appendix and the follow-up. The examples that we are including actually come from a student, internship program that our Center for Social Concern runs at Hopkins, and they do a whole group interview process. It, would be in person normally, where they interview about 100 students over the course of a day through different structured, questions, through interactive activities. And so I think that that'll be really helpful for you to kind of see, for each activity, what were the key skills they were really looking for, and then how did they, structure the rubric to be able to score. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Hope. So just a few final thoughts to close us out, and I'll also play one last segment from the conversation with Christine, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. But as it was mentioned earlier, as Aaliyah mentioned earlier, you're welcome to have follow-up individual interviews with your candidates. So we're hoping that these group interviews, one, will allow you to talk to a range of students, a large group of students, and it helps with that kind of very narrow time frame that you have, which, and so then you can follow up and have individual conversations with them as well. But please, whatever you do, if you do have additional interviews, you still need to complete your process and extend offers by February 28th. You can connect with your account manager if you have questions throughout this process. Please be on the lookout for your resume books on December 30th. Hopefully you're on taking some time away though on that day in preparation for New Year's Eve, and so maybe you'll check it out in a day or so. So I'm just going to stop sharing and share these parting words from the last bit of the conversation with Christine, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Just give me 1 second.
Here, what are the top 3 best practices or recommendations for employers committed to diversity recruitment?
Sure. So I am actually going to tell you the top 3 best practices are from a colleague of mine, Aubrey Blanche. She is amazing, works at Culture Amp, and she does a lot of this diversity and inclusion work. And we had a really great fireside chat just a few months ago. And I actually would love to tell you what she said, because I think it is just spot on. So the first is that you have to intentionally design bias out. If you do not actually intentionally design it out, it's still there. And so it doesn't just happen. You have to intentionally design it out. And so that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is if you design for the margins, you will lift up the center. If you design for the margins and for those communities that are most marginalized, you will still lift up the center, right? It's kind of the rising tide lifts all boats sort of idea. And then her third is adjust by 1%. And I really love this. Her thought here is people get overwhelmed when they think about DEI and they think about what needs to be done, because the reality is there is a lot that we need to do. There's a lot that our society needs to improve upon, but it can feel overwhelming as an individual to try and feel like, well, where do I even start? Or what is my role in that? And so she always reminds people, just adjust by 1%. Think about your job, your role, what you personally have influence over, and adjust it and design bias out by 1%. Look for one thing that you can do to design it out. one decision you can make better that will improve it, right? And slowly that 1% will gain traction. And if everybody just does 1%, collectively, we are doing a lot more, right? But she says, try not to essentially like chew off everything, just 1%, and slowly you will be able to get influence and buy-in and continued support. So I think those are, in my opinion, those are 3 really great tips that allow everybody to kind of just immediately get started.
Absolutely. I love that. I think spot on, that 1% is the key. You do a little bit because it can seem certainly overwhelming and it can be discouraging. It's like, well, if we can't do everything, then we might as well not do anything, or we'll put it off until next year or whatever. So I think like that 1%, everybody doing their 1% will make huge effects. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time today and your great insight. Thank you for all that you are doing at Handshake and what Handshake has done to really support students and employers in this very interesting time. And even before, I know we certainly are big proponents of Handshake at Hopkins and are appreciative of all that the platform offers. So thank you for that. And the valuable insights that you all are bringing in terms of the research in some of this space has been very helpful too.
So appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
Absolutely.